Everyone in the diner ignored the little boy desperately moving his hands, but she knew sign language and signed back. His eyes lit up like she'd just given him the world. What she didn't know was that his father was the city's most feared mafia boss, and her kindness had just changed all their lives forever. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps above Emma's head as she stirred her lukewarm coffee for the third time in 10 minutes. Mickey's Diner wasn't exactly the kind of place you'd find on any tourist brochure for downtown Chicago, but at 1:47 a.m., it was one of the few spots still serving something that resembled food. The red vinyl booths were cracked with age, and the checkerboard floor had seen better decades, but it was warm, and more importantly, it was away from her empty apartment where the silence felt too loud. Emma had been coming here for weeks now, ever since the nightmares started keeping her awake. The late shift waitress, Dolores, barely acknowledged her anymore, just refilled her coffee cup and left her alone with her thoughts. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electric tension in the air that made Emma's skin prickle. That's when she noticed him. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sat alone in the corner booth farthest from the door. His small hands moved frantically in the air, forming shapes and gestures that Emma recognized immediately. Her heart clenched as she watched him try desperately to get the attention of anyone who passed by, the cook, the waitress, even other customers heading to the restroom. But every single person looked right through him, their faces twisting with something that looked almost like fear. Emma frowned. The boy was well-dressed in an expensive navy sweater and pressed khakis that probably cost more than Emma made in a week at her data entry job. His dark hair was neatly combed, and despite the late hour, he looked wide awake. But there was something in his eyes, a deep sadness that no child should ever have to carry. Why is everyone ignoring him? She watched as Dolores approached the boys' table with obvious reluctance, her usual gruff demeanor replaced by something that looked suspiciously like terror. The boy's hands moved again, faster this time, more urgent. Emma could see him forming the signs for please and help, his little face scrunched up in frustration. Dolores backed away without taking his order, shaking her head and muttering something under her breath that Emma couldn't hear. That was enough. Emma had learned American Sign Language 15 years ago when her younger sister Sarah was born profoundly deaf. Even after Sarah's death in that car accident 3 years ago, Emma had never forgotten the language that had connected them. She'd promised Sarah she'd never let it fade away, that she'd always be ready to help someone who needed it. Standing up on shaky legs, Emma walked across the diner, acutely aware of how every conversation seemed to die as she passed. The boy looked up as she approached, his dark eyes widening with surprise when she slid into the booth across from him. "Hi there," Emma said softly, then lifted her hands and signed, "What's your name?" The transformation was instant and heartbreaking. The boy's entire face lit up like someone had just turned on the sun. His hands flew into motion, signing so fast that Emma had to ask him to slow down. "My name is Luca," he signed, tears welling up in his eyes. "You can understand me?" "Yes, I can understand you perfectly," Emma signed back, her own throat tightening with emotion. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" Before Luca could answer, the diner's front door burst open with such force that the little bell above it flew off its hook and clattered to the floor. Emma's blood turned to ice as 6 men in dark suits flooded through the entrance, their hands conspicuously hidden inside their jackets. The few remaining customers immediately dropped to the floor or dove behind booths, and Dolores let out a small scream. But it was the 7th man who made Emma's heart stop completely. He was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 40 years old, with steel-gray eyes and a face that could have been carved from granite. His black hair was swept back perfectly, and his charcoal suit probably cost more than Emma's car. When he walked, everyone and everything seemed to bend away from him like he was a force of nature. This wasn't just dangerous. This was power in its purest, most terrifying form. The man's gaze swept across the diner with the precision of a predator until it landed on the corner booth. His expression shifted from cold calculation to something Emma couldn't quite identify. Relief. Fear? When he saw Luca, he moved with purpose, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor like a countdown. Emma's instinct screamed at her to run, but Luca's small hand had found hers across the table, and she couldn't abandon him. Not when he'd just found someone who could understand him. The man stopped beside their booth and slowly knelt down next to Luca, his massive frame somehow managing to look gentle as he reached out to touch the boy's face. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying a slight Italian accent that made it sound like velvet wrapped around steel. "You scared me, kid." Luca's hands began moving excitedly, signing something to the man who Emma realized with shock could apparently understand him. But then Luca pointed directly at Emma, his little face beaming with joy as he signed something that made the man's gray eyes snap to her face like a laser. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees as those steel-gray eyes studied Emma with the intensity of a microscope. She felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, completely exposed and utterly trapped. "You," the man said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the now-silent diner. "Who are you? And how do you know his language?" Emma's mouth went dry. Every instinct told her to lie, to run, to do anything except tell this obviously dangerous man the truth. But Luca's hand was still in hers, warm and trusting, and she could see the hope in his eyes, hope that someone finally understood him. "I'm Emma," she managed to whisper. "Emma Chun. I learned sign language for my sister." The man's eyes never left her face. Behind him, his men had positioned themselves at every exit, and Emma realized with growing terror that no one was leaving this diner until he said so. "Emma Chun," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. Then he smiled, and it was somehow more frightening than any scowl could have been. "I'm Adrian Russo. And you, Miss Chun, have just become very interesting to me." The silence that followed Adrian's words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Emma could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she watched this man, Adrian Russo, study her with a kind of focus that made her feel like prey. "Everyone out," Adrian said quietly, not taking his eyes off Emma. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout or threaten, but the effect was immediate and absolute. The few customers who had been cowering behind booths scrambled for the door like their lives depended on it. Dolores dropped her coffee pot, which shattered across the floor in a spray of ceramic and caffeine, before practically sprinting toward the back exit. Within 30 seconds, the diner was empty except for Emma, Luca, Adrian, and his 6 men, who had positioned themselves with military precision around the perimeter. Emma noticed that none of them looked directly at Luca. Their eyes seemed to slide away from the boy as if he were invisible. "What kind of life is this for a child?" "Now then," Adrian said, sliding into the booth beside Luca with fluid grace. The boy immediately nestled against his father's side, but his eyes remained fixed on Emma with desperate hope. "Let's have that conversation properly." Emma's hands trembled as she placed them flat on the scratched Formica table. "I told you. I'm Emma Chen. I work at Morrison Data Services downtown. I learned sign language because my sister Sarah was born deaf." Her voice cracked slightly on Sarah's name, the way it always did. "Was." Adrian's voice carried a dangerous softness. "She died 3 years ago. Car accident." Emma forced herself to meet those steel-gray eyes. "I kept up with signing, because I promised her I would." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Just a flicker, but Emma caught it. For a moment, the granite mask slipped, revealing something almost human underneath. Luca tugged on his father's sleeve and began signing rapidly. Emma watched Adrian's face as he followed his son's words, and she was struck by how gentle his expression became when he looked at the boy. This was a man who clearly loved his child desperately. "Tell her thank you," Luca signed to his father. "Tell her she's the first person who talked to me like I'm real." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Luca says you're the first person who's treated him like he exists." His voice carried a weight of years of frustration and pain. "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Emma looked at the boy, then back at Adrian. "People are idiots," she said simply. "Deafness doesn't make someone less human. Neither does being mute." "No," Adrian agreed. But being my son does. The words hung in the air like a confession. Emma felt pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. The fear in everyone's eyes. The way people avoided Luca. The armed men. The expensive clothes and the dangerous father. Emma swallowed hard. You're in a mafia. Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. Among other things, he gestured to one of his men. Marco, bring the car around. We're leaving. Wait, Emma said, panic rising in her chest. I should go home. I have work tomorrow, and… No. Adrian's voice cut through her protests like ice. You're coming with us. I'm not going anywhere with you. Emma started to slide out of the booth, but froze when she realized all 6 men had subtly shifted, blocking every possible escape route. You can't just kidnap me. I'm not kidnapping you, Adrian said calmly, though his eyes had gone cold again. I'm making you an offer. What kind of offer? Adrian looked at Luca, who was watching their conversation with wide, worried eyes. The boy's hands moved quickly. Is Emma in trouble because of me? No, kid. Adrian signed back, his movements surprisingly graceful for such large hands. Emma's going to help us, he turned back to Emma. My son hasn't had a real conversation with anyone in his entire life except me. And even I'm limited. I only learned basic signing after he was born. You saw how he lit up when you talked to him. That's wonderful, but… Luca trusts no one, Adrian continued as if she hadn't spoken. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it felt louder than shouting. In 8 years, he has never trusted a single person outside of me. Not his bodyguards, not his tutors, not his nannies. No 1 inch his gray eyes bored into hers. Until tonight. Until you. Emma's mouth went dry. What are you saying? Adrian leaned forward slightly, and Emma caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, gun oil, maybe. I'm saying that my son needs you, Miss Chen. And what my son needs, he gets. You can't just take me. Actually, I can. Adrian's voice turned to velvet-wrapped steel. You see, in my world, when something precious and rare appears, something that could keep my son safe and happy, I don't let it walk away. He stood up, extending his hand to Luca, who took it without hesitation. My son trusts no one, Miss Chen. Now, you don't have a choice either. 2 of Adrian's men flanked Emma's booth. They didn't touch her, didn't threaten her, but their message was crystal clear. This is insane, Emma whispered. I'm a nobody. I work data entry and live in a studio apartment with a broken air conditioner. I eat ramen noodles for dinner and shop at thrift stores. I don't belong in your world. Adrian paused at the diner's door, Luca's hand still safely in his. When he looked back at Emma, there was something almost like regret in his expression. Maybe not, he admitted. But my world just became yours, whether you like it or not. As Emma was gently but firmly escorted toward the door, she caught sight of Luca looking back at her with absolute trust and joy, signing thank you, over and over again. She was entering a world of wealth and danger she never could have imagined, and there was no way back. The wrought iron gates of the Russo estate opened silently as their black SUV approached, revealing a world Emma could never have imagined existed in the Chicago suburbs. The mansion loomed before them like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of limestone and dark windows, surrounded by perfectly manicured grounds that probably cost more to maintain than Emma made in 5 years. But it was the subtle details that made her stomach clench with dread. Security cameras tracked their movement from every angle. Men in dark suits patrolled the grounds with the practiced efficiency of soldiers. The windows weren't just tinted, they were bulletproof, thick enough that Emma could see the telltale distortion around the edges. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. Welcome to our world, Adrian said quietly as they pulled up the circular drive. Luca had fallen asleep against his father's shoulder during the 20-minute ride, his small face peaceful in a way that made Emma's heart ache. The front door opened before they even reached it, revealing a stern-faced woman in her 50s wearing a crisp black uniform. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her pale blue eyes swept over Emma with obvious disapproval. Mrs. Castellano, Adrian nodded to the woman. This is Miss Chen. She'll be staying with us. Sir. Mrs. Castellano's voice carried a slight Italian accent and absolutely no warmth. The guest room in the East Wing has been prepared. Her gaze flicked to Luca, still sleeping in his father's arms, and Emma saw something flicker across her face. Not affection, not even basic human concern, but something closer to resignation mixed with fear. As they entered the foyer, Emma was struck by the cold grandeur of it all. Marble floors reflected the light from a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her apartment building. Oil paintings in heavy gold frames lined the walls, stern-faced men who all bore some resemblance to Adrian, watching with disapproving eyes. But despite all the wealth on display, the house felt empty, lifeless. Maria will show you to your room, Adrian said, gesturing to Mrs. Castellano. We'll discuss the arrangements tomorrow. Wait, Emma said, finding her voice. What arrangements? What exactly do you expect me to do here? Adrian paused at the foot of a grand staircase, Lucas still in his arms. Help my son, he said simply. Give him what everyone else in this house has failed to provide. Which is a childhood. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. As Adrian carried Luca upstairs, she followed Mrs. Castellano through hallways lined with more security cameras and silent, watchful men. Everyone they passed averted their eyes from her, but Emma could feel their curiosity and fear radiating like heat. The boy doesn't usually bring strangers home, Mrs. Castellano said finally as they climbed to the second floor. You mean Adrian? The older woman's steps faltered almost imperceptibly. I mean Master Luca, miss.
He's particular about people.
Doesn't take to anyone. Most of the staff find him. She searched for the right word. Difficult. Emma stopped walking. Difficult how? Mrs. Castellano's face closed off immediately. Nothing for you to worry about, miss. Here's your room. She opened a door to reveal a bedroom that was larger than Emma's entire apartment, decorated in soft blues and whites with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Mrs. Castellano, Emma said before the woman could escape. How long has Luca lived like this? Surrounded by people who are afraid of him. The housekeeper's knuckles went white as she gripped the door handle. That boy is Mr. Russo's heir, miss. Everything he touches turns dangerous, whether he means it to or not. The staff. We do our jobs. We keep him safe. But getting close to him... She shook her head. That's not safe for anyone. After Mrs. Castellano left, Emma sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed and tried to process what she'd walked into. Through her window, she could see guards patrolling the grounds, their movements choreographed and deadly serious. What kind of life is this for a little boy? She was still sitting there an hour later when she heard it, a soft tapping on her door. When she opened it, Lucas stood in the hallway wearing Superman pajamas, his dark hair tousled from sleep. I couldn't sleep, he signed. Can we talk? Emma glanced around the empty hallway, then stepped aside to let him in. Of course. Are you okay? Luca perched on the edge of a chair that was far too big for him, his legs swinging freely. Everyone here is scared of me, he signed, his small hands moving with practiced sadness. They do things for me, but they never talk to me. Not really. They look at me like he struggled for the right signs. Like I'm broken. Emma's heart shattered. She knelt down in front of him, bringing herself to his eye level. You're not broken, Luca. You're perfect exactly as you are. Papa says that too. But he's the only 1 inch. Well, now you have me too. For the next hour, Emma did something revolutionary in that cold, sterile mansion. She made Luca laugh. She told him silly stories, played simple games with her hands, and taught him new signs that had nothing to do with orders or instructions or fear. Just pure, joyful communication. When Luca giggled, actually giggled, at her impression of a grumpy cat, Emma felt something shift in the house around them. It was subtle, but she was being watched. From the doorway, hidden in shadow, Adrian observed his son's transformation with growing unease. In one evening, this woman had given Luca something he'd been searching for his entire life: normalcy.
Joy.
the simple pleasure of being understood and accepted without fear. But in Adrian's world, happiness was a liability. Love was a weakness. And Emma Chin was rapidly becoming both. 20 miles across the city, in a smoke-filled warehouse, Vincent Torino ended a phone call with a satisfied smile. "So the boss has a new weakness," he told his assembled crew. "First the kid, now some girl who can talk to him." "What's the play, boss?" asked his lieutenant. Vincent's smile turned predatory. "We take them both." 3 weeks into her new life at the Russo estate, Emma had established a routine that both terrified and exhilarated her. Every morning, she would find Luca waiting outside her door with his backpack and an eager smile, ready for lessons that bore no resemblance to traditional education. Instead of math and history, Emma taught him how to express emotions he'd never been allowed to feel. Instead of reading from textbooks, they created stories with their hands about brave knights and talking animals. Most importantly, she taught him that his thoughts and feelings mattered, something no one had ever bothered to tell him before. "Today we're going to learn about feelings," Emma signed as they sat in the mansion's vast library, surrounded by leather-bound books that probably hadn't been touched in decades. "I know feelings," Luca signed back.
Happy. Sad.
"Scared." "Those are good starts. But what about frustrated? Excited? Proud?" Emma demonstrated each sign, watching Luca's eyes widen with recognition. "I feel frustrated when Mrs. Castellano runs away when I try to ask for cookies," he signed eagerly. "And excited when you teach me new words." And he paused, his small face scrunching in concentration. "Proud when Papa watches us and smiles." Emma's hands stilled. "Your father watches us." Luca nodded enthusiastically. "Every day. He stands in the doorway and watches you teach me. He thinks I don't notice, but I always do." A flutter of something Emma didn't want to examine too closely stirred in her chest. She'd been acutely aware of Adrian's presence over the past weeks, the way conversations died when he entered a room, the way his staff moved around him with choreographed precision, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face when he looked at his son. But she hadn't realized he'd been watching her work with Luca. "What does his face look like when he watches?" Emma asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "Like he's seeing something impossible," Luca signed. "Like when we watch movies and the good guy wins even though it looked impossible." That evening, Emma got her confirmation. She was in the kitchen making Luca a late snack when she heard voices from Adrian's study. The door was slightly ajar, and 2 men were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "The Torino family is making moves, boss," she heard one man say. "Vincent's been asking questions about your son, about his routines." Emma froze, a jar of peanut butter halfway to the counter. "What kind of questions?" Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. "About his schedule, his security detail, where he goes during the day." "And boss," the man's voice dropped even lower. "They're asking about the girl too. The one who talks to him." Emma's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, straining to hear more. "Vincent thinks the kid is your weakness," the second man continued. "He's planning something big. Thinks if he can get to the boy, he can force you out and take over the territory." There was a long silence, and when Adrian spoke again, his voice carried the kind of cold fury that made Emma's skin crawl. "Let him try. Anyone who touches my son dies slowly." "What about the girl, boss?" "She's not protected like the kid is. If Vincent's smart, he'll go after her first." Emma didn't wait to hear Adrian's response. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she ran through the mansion's halls, taking the stairs 2 at a time until she reached Adrian's study. The door was still cracked open, and she could see him standing behind his massive desk, his face carved from granite as he listened to his men's reports. Without thinking, Emma pushed through the door. "Emma?" Adrian's expression shifted immediately from cold calculation to surprise. His 2 men, Marco and someone she didn't recognize, stepped protectively in front of their boss, hands moving toward concealed weapons. "I heard," Emma said breathlessly. "I was in the kitchen and I heard them talking about Vincent Torino. About plans to hurt Luca." "To hurt me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian studied her face with laser intensity, and Emma realized she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd voluntarily involved herself in his dangerous world. "How much did you hear?" Adrian asked quietly. "Enough to know that Luca is in danger because of me." Emma's voice cracked. "I should leave, if my being here puts him at risk." "No," Adrian's voice cut through her words like a blade. He moved around his desk with fluid grace, stopping just inches from where she stood. This close, Emma could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker. "You're not leaving. But if Vincent Torino is a dead man walking," Adrian said with absolute certainty. "And you," he reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers surprisingly warm against her skin. "You just proved something I wasn't sure I could trust." "What?" "That you'd risk your own safety to warn me about a threat to my son." Adrian's thumb traced across her cheekbone, and Emma felt her breath catch. "That you'd choose us over your own freedom." Emma's heart was beating so fast, she was sure he could hear it. "Of course I would. He's special. And you," she trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Adrian's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. For a moment, the dangerous Mafia boss disappeared, replaced by a man who looked almost vulnerable. "From this moment forward," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow, "you are under my protection. No one touches you, Emma. Not Vincent, not anyone." The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine. "Marco," Adrian called without taking his eyes off Emma's face. "Double the security detail. And put out the word, anyone who so much as looks at Miss Chen wrong answers to me personally." As his men left to carry out his orders, Adrian's hand was still cupping Emma's face, and she realized with startling clarity that she was no longer just Luca's teacher. She was falling for his father. 2 days after Emma had rushed to warn Adrian about the Torino threat, she made a decision that would change everything. Luca had been cooped up in the mansion for weeks, his lessons confined to the sterile perfection of rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. The boy needed sunlight, fresh air, and the simple joy of being a normal kid, even if just for an hour. "Absolutely not," Adrian said when Emma brought up the idea during breakfast. He was dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair still damp from his morning shower, looking every inch the powerful businessman rather than the Mafia boss she knew him to be. "Please, Papa." Luca signed from his seat at the enormous dining table. "I want to see the ducks at Lincoln Park. Emma says there's a pond where they swim." Adrian's gray eyes softened as they always did when he looked at his son, but his jaw remained set. "It's not safe, kid. Not right now." "It could be," Emma said carefully. "What if we brought security? Kept it short, just an hour." "He's 8 years old, Adrian. He's never just played in a park." The words hit their target. Emma watched Adrian's face as he processed what she'd said, that his son had never experienced something as simple and fundamental as playing in a park. The guilt and pain that flashed across his features made her chest tighten. "1 hour," Adrian said finally. "Full security detail. And you stay within 10 feet of Marco, at all times." Luca's face lit up like the 4th of July. Lincoln Park on a Wednesday afternoon was perfect, quiet, peaceful, with just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the crisp October air. Emma sat on a bench watching Luca feed breadcrumbs to a family of mallards, his entire body vibrating with excitement as the ducks paddled closer to shore. "They're not scared of me," he signed to Emma with wonder. "They come right up to me." "Animals are smart," Emma signed back. "They know you have a good heart." Marco and 3 other men in dark suits had positioned themselves around the small pond with military precision, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. To anyone watching, they probably looked like Secret Service agents, but Emma had learned to read the subtle signs, the way their hands hovered near concealed weapons, the way they communicated with tiny earpieces, the way they never relaxed even for a second. She was so focused on Luca's joy that she almost missed the jogger who passed by their bench for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Almost. Emma's pulse quickened as she noticed other details she'd overlooked before. The maintenance worker who'd been fixing the same trash can for 20 minutes, the woman with the baby stroller who kept circling back toward them, the van parked across the street with tinted windows. Marco, Emma called quietly, but before the bodyguard could respond, everything exploded into chaos. The jogger pulled a gun from his waistband and fired 3 rapid shots at Marco, who dove to the ground, drawing his own weapon. The maintenance worker and stroller woman suddenly produced automatic rifles from their equipment, and the van's doors burst open, disgorging 6 masked men in tactical gear. "Get down," Marco roared, but Emma was already moving. Luca was frozen by the pond's edge, his small face white with terror as gunfire erupted around him. Emma sprinted across the grass, her only thought getting to him before the masked men could. She tackled Luca just as a spray of bullets chewed through the bench where he'd been standing moments before, rolling both of them behind a large oak tree. Luca was shaking uncontrollably, his hands moving in frantic, terrified signs that Emma couldn't decipher through her own panic. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, pressing his face against her shoulder so he couldn't see the violence erupting around them. "I've got you. I won't let anyone hurt you." Marco and his men were outnumbered, but not outgunned. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed across the park as they fought back with professional precision. Emma saw Marco take a bullet in the shoulder but keep firing, saw another of Adrian's men go down hard behind a park bench. Then she heard the screech of tires as more vehicles arrived, but these weren't reinforcements for Adrian's men. "There! The kid," someone shouted, and Emma looked up to see 2 masked figures flanking their position. She didn't think. She simply reacted. Emma threw herself in front of Luca just as one of the men fired, feeling a line of fire tear across her left side as the bullet grazed her ribs. The impact spun her around, and in that moment of disorientation, rough hands grabbed Luca and yanked him away from her. "No!" Emma screamed, lunging forward despite the blood spreading across her shirt.
"Luca."
One of the masked men backhanded her across the face, sending her crashing to the ground. Through blurred vision, she saw them dragging Luca toward a black SUV. The boy's terrified eyes locked on hers as he signed desperately, "Help me." Emma tried to get up, tried to run after them, but her vision grayed out and she collapsed onto the grass, her own blood pooling beneath her. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness was the squeal of tires as they took Luca away. When Emma woke up 6 hours later in a private hospital room, the first face she saw was Adrian's. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the span of an afternoon. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt was stained with what looked like blood, and his gray eyes burned with a fury that made her shrink back against her hospital pillows. "They took him," she whispered, and the words felt like swallowing glass. "I tried to protect him, but they took him." Adrian's hands were shaking, actually shaking, as he reached out to touch her face. "Emma, you took a bullet for my son. You threw yourself between him and armed men without hesitation." But it wasn't enough. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "He's gone because of me. Because I wanted him to see the stupid ducks. He's gone because Vincent Torino is a dead man who just doesn't know it yet." Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than screaming. "I'm going to burn this city to the ground until I find my son. And when I do," he stood up, straightening his jacket with movements that looked almost robotic. "Vincent Torino is going to learn what happens when you take everything that matters to Adrian Russo." Through the hospital room's window, Emma could see smoke rising from 3 different locations across Chicago's skyline. The war had begun. The warehouse smelled of rust, motor oil, and fear. Luca sat huddled in the corner of a windowless room, his wrists bound with zip ties that cut into his small hands every time he tried to move them. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast harsh shadows that made the masked men look like monsters as they paced back and forth, speaking in low voices about ransom demands and territorial negotiations. But Luca couldn't hear their words. He could only see their lips moving, their gestures growing more agitated as hours passed. What terrified him most wasn't the gun one of them carried, or the way they ignored his desperate attempts to communicate. It was the absolute silence of his world, made even more isolating by the knowledge that no one here would ever understand him. Emma, he thought desperately, his small hands forming her name in sign language, even though no one was watching. Where are you? Across the city, Emma was staging her own rebellion against Adrian's protection. She'd been discharged from a hospital that morning against medical advice, the bandages across her ribs pulling tight with every movement. Adrian had immediately installed her in a safe house with 6 armed guards, strict instructions not to leave under any circumstances. He'd underestimated her determination. I need some air, Emma told Marco, who was stationed outside her bedroom door with his arm in a sling from the park shooting. Just on the balcony. Marco nodded, his face grim with exhaustion. 5 minutes, then back inside. Emma stepped onto the small balcony and immediately began studying the fire escape that zigzagged down the building's side. The guards were watching the front entrance, the elevator, and the stairwells, but they'd overlooked the most obvious route. 10 minutes later, she was on the street, adrenaline overriding the pain in her side as she hailed a taxi. Where to, lady? The driver asked, noticing her hospital bracelet and the way she moved carefully. The docks, Emma said. And I'll pay you double if you don't ask questions. During the ride, Emma's mind raced through every conversation she'd had with Luca about his life before she arrived. He'd mentioned playing a game with his father where they would practice emergency signs, specific gestures that only they knew, designed for situations where silence was crucial. If you're ever in trouble and can't make noise, Adrian had taught him, use the old signs. The ones from when Papa was little like you. Luca had shown Emma some of these signs during their lessons, giggling as he demonstrated this secret language he shared with his father. Italian Sign Language, older variations that predated modern ASL. Emma had been charmed by the father-son bond it represented. Now, those same signs might be Luca's only way to communicate with rescue. Emma had another advantage. 3 weeks of living with Luca had taught her to think like him. The boy was fascinated by water, always drawing pictures of boats and harbors. When he was scared, he gravitated toward places that reminded him of safety and escape. The warehouse district near Lake Michigan stretched for miles, but Emma started with the buildings closest to the water, the ones where a terrified 8-year-old might imagine boats that could carry him home. She found him on her 4th attempt. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but Emma noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt and cigarette butts that hadn't been weathered by rain. More importantly, she saw movement behind a second-floor window, just a shadow, but it was small enough to be a child. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she studied the building's layout. 2 guards at the front entrance, 1 walking the perimeter. She needed a way in that wouldn't alert them to her presence. The loading dock on the building's east side had a broken window just large enough for someone Emma's size to slip through. The glass cut into her palms as she pulled herself inside, but she bit back any sound that might give her away. The warehouse interior was a maze of stacked crates and abandoned machinery. Emma moved through it like a ghost, following the sound of voices toward the back of the building. When she finally found the room where they were holding Luca, she nearly cried with relief. He was alive. Scared but alive. Emma positioned herself near a gap in the wooden crates where she could see into the room without being spotted. 3 men, all armed, all focused on a phone conversation with someone who was clearly giving them orders. Boss wants the kid delivered by midnight, one of them said. Says if Russo doesn't cave by then, we send him pieces. Emma's blood went cold, but she forced herself to focus. Luca was sitting against the far wall, his dark eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape routes. Even bound and terrified, he was thinking, planning, just like his father had taught him. Moving carefully, Emma positioned herself where Luca could see her through the gap in the crates. She waited until the guards were distracted by their phone call, then began signing in the old Italian variations Luca had shown her. Little Wolf, she signed, using the pet name Adrian called his son. I'm here. Luca's eyes went wide, but to his credit, He didn't make a sound or sudden movement. Instead, he began signing back with tiny, careful gestures that wouldn't attract attention. 3 men. 2 guns. One has keys to the car outside. His small hands moved with precision despite his fear. They're waiting for Papa to call. They want to trade me for something. Can you move quietly? Emma signed back.
Yes.
But Luca's face grew urgent. The man with the scar is coming back. He went to check the perimeter. He'll be here soon. Emma felt her blood turn to ice. A 4th man, one she hadn't accounted for. And he was already on his way back. When I signal, get ready to run, she told Luca. No matter what happens, you run to the water and hide. Your papa will find you. But even as she signed the words, Emma knew they were probably both going to die in this warehouse. She was one unarmed woman against 4 armed men, wounded and running on pure determination. It didn't matter. She wouldn't let Luca face this alone. Just as Emma was preparing to create some kind of distraction, Luca's hands moved in frantic warning. Behind you. Emma spun around to find herself face to face with a man whose scarred face she recognized from Adrian's security briefings, Vincent Torino himself, pointing a gun directly at her head. Well, Vincent said with a cold smile. Looks like Adrian Russo's little girlfriend came to play hero. Vincent Torino's scarred face twisted into a satisfied smile as he kept his gun trained on Emma's forehead. You know, I was expecting Adrian himself to come charging in here like some kind of action hero. Instead, I get his son's babysitter. Emma forced herself to meet his eyes, even though her knees felt like they might give out. Let the boy go, Vincent. Your fight is with Adrian, not with an 8-year-old. Oh, but you're wrong about that, Vincent said, stepping closer. Through the gap in the crates, Emma could see Luca watching with wide, terrified eyes. The boy is the key to everything. Adrian's weakness. His soft spot, Vincent's gaze flicked to Emma. Though it looks like he's developed another one. From inside the room, one of Vincent's men called out. Boss, we got movement on the perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Vincent's smile widened. Right on schedule. Seems Papa Bear found our little hiding spot after all. He pressed the gun against Emma's temple, the metal cold against her skin. Here's how this is going to work, sweetheart. You're going to walk into that room nice and slow, and then we're all going to wait for Adrian to come save his precious family. Emma's mind raced as Vincent forced her toward the room where Luca was being held. Through the broken windows, she could hear the distant rumble of engines, multiple vehicles moving fast. Her heart soared with desperate hope even as Vincent's gun never wavered from her head. But it was the sound that came next that made Vincent's confident smile falter, the sharp crack of sniper fire from somewhere outside the warehouse. What the hell was that? One of Vincent's men shouted. Jimmy's not responding on radio, another called out. Neither is Tony, at the front entrance. Vincent's grip on Emma tightened. Doesn't matter. We still have the kid and the girl. Adrian won't risk. The warehouse's front wall exploded inward. The blast was deafening, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying across the space. Through the smoke and dust, dark figures poured through the breach with military precision. Emma caught glimpses of muzzle flashes and heard the controlled bursts of automatic weapons fire as Adrian's men systematically cleared the building. But it was Adrian himself who appeared through the smoke like an avenging angel that made Emma's breath catch. Gone was the carefully controlled businessman in the expensive suit. This was Adrian Russo in his true element, dressed in tactical gear, carrying a military-grade assault rifle, his gray eyes burning with a fury that could have melted steel. He moved through the warehouse like death itself, every motion calculated and lethal. Vincent. Adrian's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I'm here for my son. Send him out, and maybe I let you live. You're in no position to make demands, Russo. Vincent shouted back, dragging Emma into the room where Luca was being held. His remaining men took defensive positions behind overturned tables and machinery. I've got your boy and your girlfriend. One wrong move and they both die. Adrian appeared in the doorway like a nightmare made flesh, his weapon trained on Vincent. Let them go, and I'll make it quick. Vincent laughed, pressing his gun harder against Emma's head. You think you scare me? You think. Emma saw her chance when Vincent's attention shifted to Adrian. In one desperate motion, she drove her elbow back into Vincent's ribs and dove toward Luca, wrapping her arms around the terrified boy just as gunfire erupted throughout the room. Vincent's men opened fire on Adrian's position, but he was already moving, rolling behind cover as his own men flanked the room from multiple angles. The sound was deafening. Automatic weapons, shouted orders, the crash of equipment being destroyed by bullets. Emma pressed Luca's face against her shoulder, shielding him with her body as debris rained down around them. She could feel him shaking against her, his small hands clinging to her shirt as she tried to make herself as large as possible between him and the violence. I've got you, she whispered in his ear, even though she knew he couldn't hear her over the gunfire. I've got you, baby. It's going to be okay. A bullet whined past Emma's head, so close she felt the heat of it, and embedded itself in the wall behind her. Another shattered a wooden crate just inches from where they huddled. Through it all, Emma kept herself wrapped around Luca like a human shield, absorbing the impact when falling debris struck her back and shoulders. The firefight seemed to last forever, but in reality, it was probably less than 2 minutes. Adrian's men were professionals, and Vincent's crew were street thugs with more ego than training. One by one, Vincent's men fell until only Vincent himself remained, wounded and cornered behind an overturned table. It's over, Vincent, Adrian called out, his voice deadly calm now that the shooting had stopped. Come out. Go to hell, Russo. Vincent snarled, but Emma could hear the fear in his voice now. What happened next would be burned into Emma's memory forever. Adrian stepped into the open, completely exposed, his weapon lowered. For a moment, Emma thought he'd lost his mind. Vincent still had a gun, was still dangerous. But then she saw the cold calculation in Adrian's eyes, the way he moved with absolute confidence. Vincent took the bait. He rose from behind his cover, gun raised, triumph flashing across his scarred face. Adrian was faster. The single shot was precise, final. Vincent crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering away harmlessly. In the sudden silence that followed, Adrian's mask finally dropped. His hands were shaking as he ran to where Emma and Luca huddled against the wall, falling to his knees beside them. Luca, Emma, are you hurt? His voice cracked as he reached out to touch his son's face. Did they hurt you? Papa. Luca signed, launching himself into his father's arms. Emma saved me. She jumped in front of the bullets. Adrian's gray eyes found Emma's, and what she saw there took her breath away. Not the cold Mafia boss, not the calculated killer, but a father who had nearly lost everything that mattered to him. You could have died, he whispered, his hand gentle as he touched the cuts on her face from flying debris. So could he, Emma whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence in a dusty warehouse, Emma realized she was looking at a man who would burn the entire world to keep his family safe. The question was, when had she started thinking of herself as part of that family? The Russo mansion had never felt more like home than it did in the golden light of dawn 3 days after the warehouse. Emma sat curled in the library's window seat, watching Luca play in the garden under the watchful eyes of his bodyguards. The boy was different now, not broken by his ordeal, but somehow stronger, more confident in the way he moved through the world. Maybe that came from finally understanding that he was worth fighting for. Emma's ribs still ached from the bullet graze and the debris that had rained down on her in the warehouse, but seeing Luca's joy made every moment of pain worthwhile. He was currently trying to teach one of the younger guards basic sign language, his small hands moving with patient enthusiasm as the burly man fumbled through the alphabet. He's never done that before. Emma turned to find Adrian standing in the doorway, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Gone was the perfectly pressed suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple black sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. His gray eyes held a warmth she was still getting used to. Done what? Emma asked softly. Try to teach someone else to sign. Adrian moved into the room, settling into the chair across from her window seat. For 8 years, signing was something private between us. His secret language that no one else could understand. Now, he gestured toward the window where Luca was giggling at his students' attempts to sign, "Thank you." Now, he wants to share it with the world. Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. He's not hiding anymore. No, Adrian agreed quietly. He's not. His gaze shifted from his son to Emma's face, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Do you know what you've given him, Emma? I don't know what you mean. Adrian leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he searched for the right words. For 8 years, I watched my son disappear a little more each day. He was there, he was breathing, he was alive, but he was fading away like a ghost. No one saw him, no one heard him, no one tried to understand who he really was underneath the fear. Emma's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. I learned sign language the day he was born, Adrian continued. Bought every book, hired every teacher, practiced until my hands cramped. But I could only give him words, Emma. You gave him something far more precious. What's that? A voice. Adrian's voice broke slightly. You gave my son a voice in a world that had decided he was invisible. You made him real again. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she watched this powerful, dangerous man struggle with emotions he'd probably never allowed himself to feel before. Adrian, I need to ask you something, he said, standing up and moving to the window where he could see Luca playing. And I need you to think carefully before you answer, because once I ask it, there's no going back. Emma's heart began to race. Okay. Adrian turned to face her, and she was stunned to see vulnerability written across every line of his face. This wasn't the Mafia boss or the calculated businessman. This was just a father who'd nearly lost everything. Stay, he said simply. Not as Luca's tutor. Not as someone I'm protecting because you helped us. Stay as he struggled for a moment, then forced himself to continue. Stay as family, Emma. Real family. Mine and his. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious and terrifying. I know what my world is, Adrian continued when Emma didn't immediately respond. I know what I am, what I've done. I know I'm asking you to tie yourself to something dangerous and dark and complicated. But Emma, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You're the missing piece we didn't even know we needed. You make us whole. Emma stood up slowly, her entire body trembling as she moved toward him. Adrian, are you asking me to? I'm asking you to marry me, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I'm asking you to be Luca's mother and my wife and the heart of whatever kind of family we can build together. I'm asking you to take all of us, the good, the bad, the dangerous, and let us be yours. Emma's breath caught. Through the window, she could see Luca had stopped his lesson and was watching them intently, his dark eyes bright with hope. Yes, she whispered, and the word felt like coming home. Adrian's expression transformed, relief and joy and something deeper flooding his face. He stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing across her cheekbone like he still couldn't believe she was real. Are you sure? He asked. Once you're part of this family, Emma, I'll never let you go. I don't want you to, she whispered back. The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, full of promises and hope and the fragile beginning of something beautiful. They were interrupted by the library door slamming open as Luca barreled into the room, his face flushed with excitement and his hands moving frantically. Are you getting married? He signed to both of them. Are we going to be a real family? Emma knelt down to his level, her hands steady as she signed back. If that's what you want, sweetheart. Luca's response made both adults freeze. Mom, he signed, looking directly at Emma. Then he turned to Adrian. Dad, his small face was radiant with joy. I have a mom and dad now. A real family. Adrian's composure finally cracked completely. He sank to his knees beside Emma and pulled both her and Luca into his arms, holding them like they might disappear if he let go. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Russo, feared by enemies and respected by allies, a man who controlled an empire built on power and violence, felt truly at peace. Outside the library windows, the morning sun painted the mansion's grounds in gold, and for once, the fortress felt like what it had always been meant to be. A home.